It's the Bottom Line podcast here on the Blood Red channel. I'm Guy Clarke. Welcome along. As the Reds evolve their transfer approach, securing Darwin services from Benfica, we explore the finances behind the deal, worth a potential £85 million. We'll also examine how Julian Ward has uncovered one of world football's hottest young prospects and the dealings behind the scenes, which has secured him a 6-year deal at Anfield, as well as the commercial success it could provide for the Reds. Here to do all of that, it's a pleasure to welcome the Echo's business of football writer, Dave Powell. Dave, I trust you're well, and this deal potentially a club record.
Yeah, it's got all the hallmarks of being so. The guaranteed sum less than what they paid for Virgil van Dijk and Alisson Becker, but with all the add-ons included, it looks set to kind of break new ground for FSG and Liverpool. 85 million is all told when everything's considered. If the add-ons are met and triggered, then it's going to be the biggest investment that FSG have made into the first team squad at Liverpool since they've been here.
And that's the way of looking at it, I suppose, with this deal is so often it's FSG, it's sell to buy, and this, that, and the other, which we will get into and talk about maybe how Liverpool are affording this deal. But equally, this is seen as an investment to secure, I suppose, the next rung of Liverpool's forward line.
It's vital as well, Guy, because there is a need now for Liverpool. And you can argue that it started last summer with the addition of Ibrahima Konate. There has to be a transition plan in place at Liverpool for what comes next, because obviously it's an aging squad. You've got Milner, Salah's approaching 30, Mane, Van Dijk, and there has to be a plan in place to change these parts of the machine before it becomes a costly exercise. Because if you leave this go too long without investing into the first team squad, I mean, in reality, you probably think that the current squad could have achieved what they achieved this season, next season, but it's what comes after that. There has to be a way of managing the change that's going to occur over the next 3 or 4 years and the cost that comes with that. So if you were to not invest in young talent now and in talent which is going to take you through to the next phase, then you're left faced with a huge rebuilding job, which costs enormous amounts of money. And the market is only going up as well. So Liverpool want to sign players that are undervalued. They've not yet really reached their potential, and their market value will only increase. So going to market for world-class players to fill voids is very difficult and very costly. So signing those players that are just beneath that services, your Diaz's, your Darwin Nunez's, that's exactly where FSG kind of sit in their transfer recruitment policy. And that's not earth-shattering. That's something which we've known since they've arrived. But I think the getting Jurgen Klopp's deal signed through to 2026 has emboldened them somewhat to be willing to invest in the first team this summer, and I think next summer as well, because it gives them more security over who is going to be managing the operations and who is the person that's going to be leading these players that they spent so much money on. And I think it removes some of the risk that is attached to it. If you're handing the keys to a rebuilding job to someone new, that can be a challenge. It's been proven in the past that it could be a challenge. It's bigger for so many people, big names as well. So I think it's a sensible move. I know the numbers. There's been so much written past few days around Haaland and Nunez and how those two deals stack up and how much Liverpool are spending after all these years of people saying, "Oh, we don't spend any money."
I was going to say I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated on that element to come around kind of the whole package of things, but kind of going back to me saying at the start there, this is an investment. Is if he's signing a 6-year contract at Liverpool and it's just over £60 million is the guaranteed sum. The way it works on the spreadsheets is that's 10 million a year for the 6 years of that initial contract. It isn't as much as it's the guaranteed money. For example, if Mane leaves, that will be 40 plus million should that fee be accepted. That be what Bayern come to. That is immediately put on the balance sheets. If you can kind of explain that to the listeners from the financial perspective, how it sits and works on the club's balance sheets for FFP purposes.
Yes, I mean, if you are thinking about how this it seems like a huge deal on the face of it, but in reality, the 64 million I think is guaranteed. So that's the cost which will be amortised across the length of the deal. So as you say, that 64 million fee becomes 10 million odd a year, which appears as a cost on the balance sheet. Then you have your wage liabilities. So ensuring that wage liabilities are kept under control has been something which is key for FSG. And now I'd wager that Nunez, coming from the Portuguese league into the Premier League, is not going to be able to command the kind of money that, say, a renegotiation of a Sadio Mane or a Mo Salah would have done. So had Liverpool have engaged in an extension with Mane as well, I mean, that if you look at the kind of reported wages that are being thrown around there for him going to Bayern of 375,000 or so, then that is a considerable chunk on top of what you would be that kind of amortized cost. I think FSG are more comfortable with transfer fees than they are with wage liability. So I think they're quite happy to have have that 10 million or so cost on a balance sheet for the next 6 years with Nunez. More importantly to them is having a player that fits within the wage structure. So, and as you mentioned, if Mane goes, that offsets a large chunk of the cost anyway that they would have had with Mane, and also it's a way of it points back to what FSG have done in the past in terms of the club basically washes its own face. It's what they pay for new players by selling players, with other people's money that's come back into the football club. So the outlay is limited, the risk is pretty limited, I think. You only have to look at the rise in value of Nunez over the course of the past year or so. I think he's second behind Vinicius from Real Madrid in terms of how his value has grown. I think it's grown something like 20 odd million in the past 12 months or so, purely because he's been one of the hottest prospects in European football. He fits the profile with age, and that's something which attracts suitors from across Europe. The benefit for Liverpool has been in attracting him this summer is that because of a fairly slow market last year, while some clubs recovered from the pandemic, there has been gaps filled. So City have gone for Haaland, and the Mbappe situation was resolved with him staying at PSG, which kind of removes their need to go out and buy another striker for considerable amounts of money. Barcelona still have their own issues, so they've gone for kind of an option which ticks a box in Lewandowski in terms of the fans will appreciate a world-class player, but also someone who isn't going to cost the earth to finance. So then you're just left with the likes of United, really. I mean, Real Madrid have been in the market already for Tchouaméni and paid considerable money. So you wonder how willing they'd be to get into a bidding war. But it leaves United, who have got Europa League football to kind of present to players next season. So it's something which Liverpool were always in pole position for, I think. But I don't think the risk is as big as it would seem on the face of it when you look at those potential add-ons raising it to 85 million, because I think some of them are achievable. Player appearance related. So you've got, I think it's after 60 appearances, something like 8 million. But that's not going to happen until next year and another financial year. So the cost gets spread. So the risk is kind of negligible, really.
And I suppose by that point, the hope is he's proven himself after 60 games to be at the level that warrants more of a transfer fee that Liverpool are happy to go up to. But I genuinely am fascinated on the wage structure. And you mentioned there how FSG want the wage bill to be at a certain level. There is a structure there of just how they continue to operate in, as you say there, Haaland and Mbappe were the two star players who everyone was sniffing around. The top clubs were sniffing around, looking to bring in this summer. Liverpool believed to have had interest in both players, but realised financially, in terms of the wage liability, it wasn't viable for them to get involved in. And yet they go and unearth a talent like Darwin Nunez, who's shown what he can do in the Champions League this season. And if it's to be believed, his wage outlay will probably be half, if not more than half, of less than half of what Erling Haaland's weekly wage is going to be at Manchester City. And yet they keep that competitive element whilst always constantly working on this wage bill. Sadio Mane and Mohamed Salah both want new contracts. They know they simply can't finance new deals for both of them, because a bit like the Gini Wijnaldum situation of last year, effectively the player will go to the club and say, "You need to backdate me my pay for what I've been worth to the club in the past." But FSG don't work like that. They've tied Nunez down to a 6-year deal, which I'm sure by the end of the 6 years he probably will have signed an extension within that time. But if he does see it through to 6 years, you'll say, what value again they've been able to negotiate.
Absolutely, and you look at the wage bill, the a renegotiation for both Salah and Mane, the kind of the sums mooted just was never going to be possible. I imagine the Nunez deal is heavily pointed towards him reaching a lot of markers. So whether it's team success, individual success, I imagine that there are certain markers he hits to give him. I mean, we talk about it being an FSG thing, about how they've managed that they always like bonus structures within contracts because it rewards success, which ultimately that success is lucrative. So you are paying for increases in contracts or bonus payments by money which is coming to the football club through success. So that makes a lot of sense. Ferran Soriano did it with Barcelona when he was there. So I imagine Nunez is quite kind of a dynamic contract whereby he has to hit these certain markers and triggers. So, but for Liverpool, it keeps them under that threshold. So when you look at the balance sheet every single year, it's predictable, and team owners like cost certainty, and that's what they get with Liverpool. So if there are any circumstances such as the team succeeds by winning the Champions League or the Premier League, yes, there are bonus payments which need to be paid, and they're considerable. But the money that is recouped from what they did to achieve that more than covers that. So it's their way of doing things. So the issue with we have had this. I think we've had this conversation before about Salah, where there's a notion of kind of pay these people what they want. There isn't an issue whether FSG can afford that because they're a profitable football club. They are one of the biggest football clubs in the world. They are a financial powerhouse. The issue arises when if you change the model for one considerably, then there is reason to expect that the rest will follow. So when you go into contract negotiations with someone new, whether it's an existing player or whether it's a new player, they know the club are willing to break or bend at least to demands, and that then means that the case of a few million, which you may point out to Salah, saying, well, it's not going to mean too much if we just do it for Salah. Before you know it, you're doing it for the bulk of the squad to keep them together, and the whole dynamic changes again. And that's where we move into the territory of unsustainable football again. So it's they do it for a reason. It's been successful, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon under Fenway Sports because it's their way of working. But I think while they keep on managing to kind of find players like Diaz and hopefully Nunez will turn into that kind of player, because if they if he succeeds after year one and year two, they'll be offering him fresh terms, which will then reduce the amount of the amortized payment that gets paid that appears in the balance sheet every year anyway. So they'll make a saving that way. So it all makes sense. It all fits in perfectly into the whole FSG ethos of how they're doing things. But I think their willingness to invest this summer does come back to them having more security over their place in the footballing world again, in terms of Champions League qualification, also having Jurgen Klopp long term. All that makes perfect sense, and it's never a better time for FSG to invest, I don't think.
On what you said before, Dave, I think it's going to be so interesting, that wage structure over the next year in particular. We know a certain number 11's contract is ticking down, to see what does happen there. And you just planted a seed in my mind of sort of saying that not so much of an issue of paying transfer fees, as to whether there's a way around the Salah negotiation. If you pay him a big signing on fee to say stay at Liverpool, and see if that's a way around it. But that'll be for another time, I'm sure. But let's move on with Darwin Nunez. And one of the the things I'm really intrigued as well with the deal is of looking at Luis Diaz having arrived recently as well from South America, and Julian Ward really using his contacts book to first of all scout these players with South American backgrounds, given his time at Manchester City, heading up their South American scouting department, and then utilising his Portuguese contacts and Liverpool really dipping into this Portuguese market. But is when you look at kind of the first incarnation of Jurgen Klopp's side and the star signings being Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane, two African players, which really boosted Liverpool's profile and presence in the African market, whether or not, and I'm not saying Liverpool buy these players for the commercial reasons, but buying Luis Diaz and Darwin Nunez, two South American players who are both very much on the up, what that will do for Liverpool in the South American market.
It's an interesting question. I mean, the African players there in Mane and Salah obviously make a difference. Salah particularly because he's a Muslim, and prominent Muslim athletes aren't particularly plentiful within the West, I suppose. So he has become a real kind of beacon for kind of Muslim sports fans, and that is has huge commercial value because his appeal isn't just it transcends the sport and people who may be supporters of Liverpool. It's something which has a real global reach. So recently I was in New York and I kind of took a little walk down just from a couple of streets from Times Square. There's a huge Mohamed Salah mural that dominates the side of an apartment block, and it can be seen, for miles around. It's and it's him in his Egypt kit. It's not reference to Liverpool or their position in the market in the US. It's him in his Egypt kit with various kind of images of him playing for Egypt. So it's very much about him as an icon, kind of an African icon, an icon for Muslim sports fans. So that has had huge commercial values for Liverpool. Mane, again, a huge popular figure in Africa from Senegal. The market's slightly different than in South America. There's a hugely passionate fan base, but while in Africa, a lot of the focus is on individual athletes rather than their own domestic leagues, because the Premier League is the big league in Africa where fans follow. In South America, there's they have their own strong league. So the idea being that Liga MX is the most watched football league in the US. The Brazilian league is enormously popular domestically. So I don't think they look towards kind of European football for their individual heroes as much as maybe Africa does. But certainly it won't hurt them because they're both at the right age profile. Certainly Darwin Nunez. So you wonder how. We just don't know how he's going to perform. He could be turned into an absolute superstar, but
yeah, on it as well though. And I mean, maybe it's too deeply ingrained in South American viewing psyche that, as we saw when Luis Suarez was at Liverpool, as soon as Barcelona comes sniffing, those South American players so often dream of playing for Barcelona and for Real Madrid. I just wonder, with Liverpool having been in 3 Champions League finals in 5 years, if they continue to hit those levels and Barcelona's decline maybe continues for a little while longer, if Diaz and Nunez are the spearhead of this next mold of Liverpool, if actually they start coming into the conversation. We saw them in the FIFA Club World Cup, how passionately that was taken by Flamengo in Brazil. I'm sure even that game would have boosted Liverpool's profile in South America. And whether or not, as I say, with these Uruguayan and Colombian forwards leading the line, whether actually eventually Liverpool can start to break down that and become one of the heralded clubs of South American youngsters.
That seems like the last bastion that Liverpool have to really overcome, is that no matter how much success they seem to have had in recent years under Klopp, etc., there is always it remains Barcelona and Real Madrid are the clubs where people would be willing to move on. So it's about being at the very top of that tree, as you suggest there. Barcelona's decline is real. I mean, for all the bluster that they may come out with, the Spotify deal, etc., they're a club mired in financial crisis at the minute, and something they're going to have to manage for a considerable period of time. And their ability to go toe to toe with the biggest clubs just isn't there. I mean, will it come again? I imagine it will, because they are a powerhouse. But Real Madrid have managed to reassert themselves at the top of the tree again, as they did this season. But having, I suppose this is the best time possible for Liverpool to make hay while the sun shines, I suppose, and take advantage of the fact that there has been a pausing in the kind of juggernaut that is Spanish football over the past couple of years, although Real Madrid obviously succeeded this season. And having two of South American football's most prominent young stars won't hurt them a bit in terms of how they're viewed in South America, whether it's Uruguay, whether it's Colombia and beyond. Liverpool already have a foothold in there, obviously, as you mentioned, with Suarez. And I think that as the game is growing and there are different ways to engage fan bases, far more than there were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So the more you can grow your global fan base, and if that's done through having superstars that play in South, are South American playing for you, that means that you are potentially reaching new consumers. Same for the Nike deal. There's potential uplifts there where the more interest there is in the football club, the more likely people would be to buy Nunez shirts or Luis Diaz shirts, and all that funnels back in some way, shape or form to Liverpool's coffers. So there are benefits in having superstars in these markets, but I don't think that I think that the Mohamed Salah one was quite unique in how valuable it was. I mean, you only have to look at the most valuable athletes in the Forbes list for 2022 was published last month. Salah was the only Liverpool player on there and one of the very few football players. But his off-field earnings were considerably higher than many others because he's able to leverage his position as a prominent Muslim athlete so well. I imagine certainly Nunez and Diaz will see a lift in the South American market for Liverpool, but whether it will be as considerable as what Salah's done, I doubt it.
Yeah, the final question I was going to ask, and you started mentioning it there, was shirt sales. To me as a kid, it was always one of the things that was trotted out when a big signing came in. Oh, well, off the pitch, it will really help the club because of the amount of shirt sales of players. Now, I get Mane and Salah have been there for a long, long time. And for me, I'd say, well, does the allure of them wear off of the shirt sales? But going and paying 65 million or so guaranteed and potentially a club record signing, I'm sure as soon as those shirts are available in the club shop, they're going to be flying like hotcakes, aren't they?
Absolutely. I think signing Diaz in January and the impact he's had means that it will the Diaz name in the club shop and number will be one of the biggest sellers from this summer as soon as the new shirt's released. And Nunez as well. I mean, big signings are always something which fans latch onto, and especially when it's your club record signing and you're going into a new season having been Champions League finalists, won 2 domestic cups and gone 15 minutes away from winning the Premier League. There will be a spring in the step despite the disappointment of the final week, maybe. So yeah, I expect those two to feature heavily. Whether or not, I'm not too sure we'll be seeing Mane shirt sales, but I imagine the Diaz ones and the Nunez ones will more than outstrip what happens in that respect. But it's shirt sales. I mean, a lot is made out of it. So I remember when Messi signed for PSG, a lot was made that they'll pay for the deal in shirt sales alone. It won't. There isn't the scope to do that type of thing. But the more you can sell, the more money comes into the club, and certainly for Liverpool's set up with their deal with Nike, with the fact they get 20% kickback of royalties from the sale of Nike merchandise, it can only serve to help. I mean, then you have you can branch out into other branded Nike merchandise featuring Diaz and Nunez to present into different markets. But there are a million and one ways to leverage these kind of relationships to bring money in, and I'm sure Liverpool are going to be exploring every single one of them.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Like here on Blood Red, we'll be exploring every single avenue of covering the deal to bring Darwin Nunez to Liverpool. Do remember, if you want to get in touch with us at Blood Red, we have recently launched an email address, bloodred@reachplc.com, for any feedback or correspondence you want to send in to us. Do get us on that email address, bloodred@reachplc.com. All that's left to do is say thanks to Dave for joining us for the latest edition of the Bottom Line podcast. And Dave, I'm sure the off season, the hard work's only just beginning for you from the business of football perspective.
Yeah, no, the football's finished now, so it's my time to shine now. When there's no football, it's when the numbers come into play. So yeah, this is my season's just started.
No, brilliant stuff. And there will be plenty more from Dave, of course, across the Blood Red channel, as well as the Liverpool Echo website. But from myself, Guy Clarke, and Dave Powell, thanks for your time and your company. It's bye for now.